Welcome to Informatica Support's Multimedia KB session. My name is Vimal, and in this session, I'm going to discuss how to create and configure a default cache table or custom cache table for a SQL Data Service in 9.5.1. In today's agenda, I'm going to briefly discuss about data object caching and enabling the caching for virtual tables and logical data objects, and creating and configuring a default cache table or a custom cache table. And at the last, what is the requirement to use a custom cache table and not the default cache table? When a query is executed against the SQL Data Service, by default, the Data Integration Service extracts the source data from the underlying physical tables and builds the required data objects. And this could be time consuming, thus causing performance impact. The data object caching can be enabled at the logical data object or at the virtual table level, and when the object caching is enabled, the data integration service reads the data from these cached objects. Enabling the data object caching improves the performance for the SQL Data Service, thus helping to bring back the data faster than when the caching is not enabled. So when the caching is enabled for a logical data object or a virtual table, by default, a cache table is created. And this default cache table is created by the data integration service. But if you do not want to use the default cache table and want to use a custom structure, you would use the custom cache table property. And this table has to be manually created by the user. In the further parts of the demo, I would show how to create this custom cache table. So for the purpose of this demo, I have created a very simple logical read mapping with a single Oracle source connected to a data object. So now let me take you to the developer client and show you this read mapping. As you can see, I have a single Oracle source with two columns ID1, ID2 connected to a single data object. But in real-time scenarios, this data object target could have thousands and thousands of columns and could hold millions of rows. So querying this data object could take time for the data to be returned, which can be alleviated by enabling the data object cache. Um, for this, at this time, I have only one row loaded into the Oracle source A1. So let me query the Oracle table and show you the data that I have. So I have run the select star from A1 table, and as you can see, this table has two columns called ID1 and ID2, and it has only one single row, 1, 2 as part of the table. So now let me take you to the administration console where the caching can be enabled or disabled, and you can also choose whether you want to use the default cache table or the custom cache table. I have logged into the administration console, highlighted the DIs that I want to use, and gone to the applications tab here. And as you can see, the application has been stopped by me manually. And the caching can be enabled at either the virtual table level or at the logical data object level. So when I have the virtual table level, as you can see here, my caching has been defaultly set to false, which means it has been disabled. The same case holds true for my logical data object also. So now I want to enable the caching. So highlight the object and click on edit and check mark the enable caching property. So once you have that property enabled, your caching has been enabled to be used. And discussing about the next two properties here, cache refresh period and cache table name. So the default value is 0, and for example, let's say that I set it to 60 minutes. What that means is the data object manager of the data integration service, it will refresh the cache table every 60 minutes, provided that you are using the default cache table. How do you know that you are using the default cache table? That default cache table is used if this cache table name property is left as empty and no table name is manually populated here. So if I go ahead and click on OK here, what this means is that the data integration service is responsible for enabling refreshing the default cache table and refreshing the table every 60 minutes. So now let's go ahead and start the application and see if the cache table has been created in the cache database. So one thing that you do need to do before you enabling the cache is that when you highlight the DIS and go to the properties tab, underneath the logical data object virtual table cache properties, you need to update the cache database that you need these cache tables to be created in. Once you have that cache table property enabled, the database has been updated and you can restart the data integration service. Once the data integration service has been restarted, you can come to the applications tab and provide the cache refresh period values that is required and enable the caching also. So now let me take you to the cache database in which this cache table is created. So this is the schema in which I have created my cache tables. So all default cache tables would start with the name cache followed by some numerical number. So as you can see, I have three cache tables and I want to open the first one that I see here and see if this is indeed the cache table that matches the structure of the data object that I created in the developer client. So I've gone ahead and opened the table, and as you can see, there are two columns and the data is a single source. So this is indeed the default cache table that was created when I enabled the caching for the data object in the administration console. Now, this default cache table, as I said, would be handled by the data integration service and refreshed every 60 minutes as the value that we have provided. Now, let's assume that you want to use the default cache table. And why would you want to use a default cache table? Let me take you back to the PowerPoint presentation. So a custom cache table is used when the cache is supposed to be managed and refreshed by an external tool and not managed by the data integration service. For example, you could use a PowerCenter CDC mapping to extract the changed data for the data object and incrementally update the cache. So depending on the business requirement, you could use an external tool or a data integration service to manage the cache tables. And if you decide that you want to use an external tool to manage and refresh the cache table, that is when you would use a custom cache. So now let me take you back to the administration console and show you how you can create and configure the DIS the DIS to choose the custom cache and enable the external tool to pick up that. So here we have to stop the application before we make any changes and highlight the logical data object, click on edit, and you have enabled the caching. You have set to 60 minutes and you want to create a custom cache table name here. So for the purpose of this demo, I have just created the custom underscore cache table here. And this table has to be manually created by the user. So what's the DDL structure? What's the structure of the custom cache that you would create? For that purpose, you would go back to the tables, to the schema, and choose the default cache table that has been created and find out what is the DDL of this table. So I have gone ahead and dumped the DDL SQL file with which this cache table can be recreated. And the structure of the cache table is here. So here I have a table, the DDL create table is B, that's my schema name, and this is the table name here. So I would copy the DDL and run this script on my schema, but with the but with the custom cache table name for which I have provided the value. So I want to create a custom underscore cache table, which would be my table name, and I have taken the DDL for that table from the DDL that created the default cache table. So let's go ahead and create this table now. As you can see I have created the custom underscore cache table, which is my custom cache table, and I have also populated my data integration service to use the custom cache table. So I'm going to go ahead and press OK here and start the application. So the application has started. So again, reiterating what I just did, I have populated the cache table name with a value called custom underscore cache. And in my cache database, I have gone ahead and created the custom underscore cache table. The DDL for this custom cache table was retrieved by retrieving the DDL with which the default cache table was created. So for the very first time, you have to enable the default cache table, create the cache table followed by the numbers, get the DDL from that, and create the custom cache table. So now let's go ahead and see in the cache database if this table has been created and what data has been loaded into the database, into the table. So I have opened the custom cache table, as you can see here, and you see that the data within the custom cache is empty, which is expected because you want the external tool to update and manage this custom cache table. But whereas if I go to my the default cache table, which is the table named cache followed by a set of numbers, it has already been populated with 1 and 2, which this table was created initially when we created the default cache table, and then we switched to the custom cache table, and this is now empty. So now you would use the external tool to manage and update this uh, custom cache table. So the logical data object at this point has been set to true and has been provided with the cache table name, which is custom underscore cache, and it would be refreshed at any time interval that you decide with the external tool. When the cache table name property is left as empty with no values provided, that means the DIS takes over, the data integration service takes over the update of the cache. So with that, it brings to the end of the topic, and would love to hear back with your feedback on this videos, and thank you very much.